My name is Alicia Greer, and I started West Point in June of 1995 and graduated in 1999. I majored in mathematics and I had a minor in systems engineering. I was then commissioned into the Army as a second lieutenant in the Corps of Engineers. I think, like most typical Chinese American families, my parents' generation, if they went to college, they went to University of Maryland. So everybody in my family had gone to University of Maryland or Montgomery College or didn't go to college. West Point came and recruited me actually to play basketball. And at that age, when I was 17, 18 years old, that's pretty much all I wanted to do. After I graduated from West Point in 1999, I went to the Officer Basic Course, which was at Fort Leonard Wood in Missouri. I was there for about 6 months, and then I was stationed at my first duty station at Fort Stewart in Georgia. While I was there as a lieutenant in the engineers, I deployed several times to Puerto Rico first, and then to Afghanistan, and then to Iraq. After the Twin Towers were hit on 9/11, my unit received orders, and the orders read, you will send a unit to deploy to an undisclosed location on an undisclosed date for an undetermined amount of time. During the deployment process, I was the movement officer, and we had to react so quickly. But because of the time and the reaction that we had to have, everything had to go by air. So I was actually in charge of creating those load plans the first time the U.S. Army has deployed an engineer unit solely by air. So I worked 3 days straight without sleep, without rest, without leaving that airfield office until I could get all of my troops out. When we flew out there, we landed in Uzbekistan because at the time, the U.S. Army actually hadn't been into Afghanistan yet. We hadn't even taken over any of the land there, and we were still fighting heavy Taliban. We had to make a combat landing just to get in, and a combat landing is essentially when the plane shuts off all of its engines. It gets right over the airfield that it's going to land on, cuts off all of its engines, electricity, so that it can't be seen or heard. And it basically goes into free fall until it gets down to the runway. And right before it lands, they cut everything back on and try to make a smooth landing. When we first landed in Uzbekistan, we had really nothing was established. We were living in tents. We didn't even have floors at the time. And there were tents of about 12 people. Because I'm a female, there were only 6 in my tent. But as an engineer, we were able to build things. And so we built ourselves floors, and we actually built ourselves doors and shelves for inside to put our stuff, because otherwise you would just have your cot. So the first airstrip that I sent some of my engineers down to was Mazar-e Sharif. And then after that, we got into Bagram Airfield, where our main mission was to keep the airfield open so that the planes could fly in and out. During Operation Anaconda, which was the first major battle that launched out of Afghanistan, and I went down to the airstrip trying to get a cement mixer on a plane, and my soldiers kept calling up and saying, ma'am, we need a cement mixer down here. We need one right now. And it was right in the middle of the night, and there was a soldier there also trying to get blood and ammunition down. We kind of went head to head because he said to me, man, we got to get ammo down there and we got to get blood down there. And I said, listen, if you don't put my cement mixer on that plane, you won't have a runway to get your blood and ammunition down to. So I get it. I get that those are vital and important things. But right now, that cement mixer needs to get down there. When I was in Afghanistan, I remember one particular trip that we took to Kabul. Myself and my first sergeant and some of the contracting officers, and what we were doing was we were trying to acquire places where we could get more materials locally because it would be easier than shipping it in. We weren't allowed to wear military uniforms. Actually, we had to wear civilian clothes. So I had my civilian clothes on, and and had my rifle strapped over my shoulder, and we went in with a security force. And they had warned us before that there would be a lot of Afghanis that would be begging for food or for money or whatever, and they warned us not to give anything because once you did, then a million more would come. And so I was standing outside and I was waiting, and I was kind of looking around, and there's a crowd of people that started to form around me, and it's just a little nerve-wracking being a female and having everybody look at you like, what are you doing here? Why are you not covered? And it was a very strange and daunting feeling. So eventually I had to go get into the car because I was a little bit fearful. We weren't really sure, there's not a whole lot of security. There's a couple of people there. So I sat in the car, and I remember this particular woman that came up, and she had a burqa on, and she was fully covered, and she was knocking on the window, and she was begging for money, essentially, and she wanted me to roll the window down, and she had her hands pasted up against the window, and she kind of just stood there, and I couldn't see her face. She lifted up her burqa, and she pulled it up over her head, and I could see her face, and she just kind of looked at me and stared. We, I think, had a moment eye to eye. I actually was able to snap a quick picture of her. But it was an amazing moment for me, especially as a female, to see her lift that burqa over her head. It's somewhat liberating, and it gave me reason and purpose to be there, which I think was a huge question before. Were we doing the right thing by being in their country? Eventually, as the crowd started to dissipate, I got back out of the vehicle and was standing there, and there was a little boy who kind of was smiling and looking at me, and I love children. So I started trying to communicate with him, though I didn't speak his language. And when nobody was looking, I pulled out a quarter that I had in my pocket, and I don't know why I had a quarter in my pocket at the time. But I pulled out the quarter. It happened to be a very particularly shiny quarter, and I slipped it to him. I handed it to him. And he took the quarter, and he just had the biggest smile on his face, and I'll never forget it. But he was just so happy, and he kept, and I motioned for him to be quiet about it. And so he just kept pulling this quarter out, and he would look at it, and he would fold it back up in his hand and put it back in his pocket, and then just kind of look around like we had this secret going on, and then he would pull it back out, and he would look at it, and he just held it like it was some great treasure. And I realized at that time that my quarter, which meant nothing to me because it was 25 cents, was this huge deal to this little boy. My unit got back from Afghanistan in 2002, and shortly thereafter we started the ground war in Iraq. When we got there, we landed in Kuwait, and we were in Kuwait for about a week, a holding area, until we could figure out our route of how we were going to get to Talil Air Base, which is where we were stationed in Iraq. The scariest time for me during all of those deployments, both Afghanistan and Iraq, was not while I was in Afghanistan or Iraq. When we found out the Twin Towers had hit, I remember shortly thereafter we received those orders that said, you guys are gonna go. It was a secret mission at that time, so we had to make sure that we didn't tell anybody. By then I had notified my family, and so they came down. My whole family came down. And I remember sitting, I remember sitting in my bedroom, and my dad came in, and he sat down next to me. And I don't even know if he said anything, but I remember that was really the first time and the only time that I really felt fear for what I was doing, and worried about what might happen. That was probably the most fearful moment for me, because when I landed on ground again, or once I got on the plane or back into go mode, you kind of do what you got to do, and you hide all of the emotions, and you hide all of the fear, and you just do whatever you have to do to get the mission accomplished and to take care of your soldiers and make sure that they feel comfortable. I decided to get out of the military in 2004, and ultimately I think I made that decision while I loved what I did in the military and I loved the experience that I had. There were two probably main reasons why I decided to get out. The first was because I knew that I eventually wanted to start a family, and having a family in the military is really difficult. The second reason why I think that I decided that it was okay for me to get out, when I was at West Point and throughout my military career, I realized that I really had a passion for service, taking care of people, getting people where they want to be, moving masses of people towards a common goal. The military can give you direction. Camaraderie that happens, the friendships that you make, is remarkable, and I just don't know that you would experience that anywhere else. For me, I actually would have never thought that I would have joined the military, but looking back, I'm so thankful that that's the path that I was put on.